Okay, then we're gonna leave it maybe a couple of seconds because people might see the notification button. It always takes maybe a couple of minutes to get people around. And we're gonna talk about a topic I particularly like today. So, why did I invite you? Dan Sobovitz, and I quote from your Twitter bio: from the West Bank to Molenbeek, speechwriter and digital communication strategist of a vice president of the European Commission, an interest in human rights and innovation, and co-founder of Crise. Crise. Exactly. You can find it on Twitter at Crise.
That is true.
And then, first of all, I want to ask you, what's with this giraffe? I mean, I think it's a beautiful piece of art, but I know it has a story behind. It's not just, a beautiful artistic creation. So this is Gigi, right? No.
Well, Gigi is the big one that you can see right here. She is actually quite big. Gigi comes from Barcelona, and she represents sustainability because she's actually made of recycled flip-flops.
You gotta be kidding me.
It's
Are you
recycled
serious?
flip-flops. You can actually give them your old ones and you get a discount. So
no way.
It's a sustainability giraffe.
Okay. So
and she looks a little bit like the whole pixel geek atmosphere that I'm trying to
it totally fits
surround myself with.
It totally fits in your office decor.
We even have some chocolates here. You can help yourself.
Well, these maybe we'll leave them out, considering my dietary habits, but I appreciate the gesture. So I'm gonna also put the link to this initiative in the post once the Facebook Live is over. But back to business. Dan, you wrote a fascinating article where you talk about, and you also talked about in a number of conferences, about what you call the globalization and technology paradox. Can you tell us more about it?
Okay. So what I mean by the paradox is basically the fact that we keep hearing about globalization. We keep being told that everybody around the world is so well connected. We can do business together. We can call each other within a second on the street. I can see basically anybody with a Skype on his phone. But what we realize more and more is that it's not really everyone, that we are connected. I mean, you come from Italy, I grew up in Israel, so it's easy for us to communicate. We share some kind of a common culture and language and an affinity to certain things. But what we have in common, which we may not have in common with our own compatriots, is basically being middle class, urban dwellers, whether we grew up like this or we adopted it. But in the end, the globalization is not everyone. In the end, the globalization is mostly about middle-class, urban people. So for me and you, it's easy to communicate. For someone from, I use in the article, I think, San Francisco, Berlin, and Tel Aviv, they can do business like this. It's not a problem. But what happens about people from the state of Brandenburg, from the city of Petah Tikva, and and from Midwest United States? Can they actually communicate so well together? And for me, the answer is no. And I think that explains a whole range of phenomena that we're seeing recently, including populism, including the fact that some people don't feel like they're part of this huge wave of opportunities, but they feel on the contrary that they're left behind.
That is very interesting. So what you're saying is that globalization is only, taking place in certain parts of the world. And basically this creates some cells that communicate among each other, and this creates a cultural divide between main cities and then let's call them rural areas.
Exactly. So the point is that it's not about certain parts of the world. It's about everywhere in the world, but not everyone. And it's not only about cities versus countryside. I mean, some countries, the countryside is much more integrated. So I mean, it has to do also with economic divides, with geographic spread. Yes. But the idea is that it's a certain typecast of people who feel attracted to globalization, who see themselves as citizens of the world. I'm not even sure they're the majority of the citizens in most countries. I think in the end we created some kind of a global bubble. We speak a lot about the European bubble, which also brings a very certain type of typecast to this city. But definitely a bubble, and maybe another phenomenon we keep hearing about, the algorithm of social media, that we only hear and see people like us.
That's the famous phenomenon of echo chambers.
Yes. So in the end, we can break the boundaries, the geographic boundaries, and technology allows us to come across, but it doesn't really allow us to come across people who have a different background, even if culturally it's different, even if they speak a different language. But to which extent can we actually speak with someone, I don't know, a housemaid in Florence? I would probably never speak to. Not because I don't want to, not because she doesn't have something interesting
Yes.
I can learn from,
Yes.
but simply because we are not part of the same network.
That is a very interesting topic. And most of the people that follow this blog and page are people working in this bubble, working and living in this bubble. Now, when I talk about bubbles, so echo chambers of people that roughly have the same background, interest, and also career prospect, we're not just talking about Brussels. It could be also, we could also refer to Washington. So the political bubble there, we could refer to the technological and innovation hub of San Francisco and so on and so forth. But now...
But it's important for me again to emphasize that it's not about geography. That San Francisco is a global intellectual construction. In Washington, it's at least national, if not international. So again, it's important that it's not about geography.
Exactly. It's not a geographical dimension.
Yeah.
What I wanted to say, what I wanted to ask you is your opinion on this. When communicating global issues, how can then international organizations communicate to these different strata of society? You might have, right now campaigns are still targeted by countries sometimes. So, but how can a global organization, or even a supranational organization like the European Union, for instance, could communicate to these different strata of society?
Yeah.
This is very challenging. Do you think there is hope?
It's indeed challenging, and I hope there is hope. I think the biggest mistake that communicators do, and I think I read you writing about it as well, is trying to target everyone. So you don't target everyone. When you speak to everyone, you speak to no one. And when you try to say everything, you basically say nothing. So the first thing to do is to narrow down your target audience. And one of the very interesting things that social media allow us to do is to personify. So to some extent, it reinforces the problem that we just described. It creates those bubbles. But at the same time, today I can speak to students of political science in the city of Milan who are interested in environmentalism. And with a very small budget, I can basically speak to these people in their language, in their jargon, in their cultural references. So it's much more complicated. It requires much more human resources, not necessarily a budget. The budget actually on social media, you can lower it because you pay per click. But it requires much more of a cultural translation to the target audience that I'm talking to.
Definitely. And this brings me to my next question to you. You wrote a piece called If It's Digital, It's Political, where you say that you argue there that popular trust in digital service providers and big data is higher than the current trust in political institutions, which is dangerously low, sometimes even higher than our trust in our own cognitive ability.
Yeah.
Now, you're giving a lot of power to companies like Facebook, Google, and Twitter. You want to tell me more about this trust in companies rather than political institutions? How did this come to happen first, and how these companies can play a role in society in the future?
So first, I didn't give them this power. To some extent, I even worry sometimes about this power. No, it's more about... it's not
express some concern.
It's not prescriptive, it's descriptive. I'm not saying that's the way it should be. I think that's the way it is, and that's probably the way it's going to continue in the near future. The comparison between trust in politics and in technology, I mean, I'm making a little bit of a methodological stretch there, because it's not really comparable.
Right.
What I try to do is basically look at surveys and the number of people who say they trust their municipal, national, international structures, political institutions, and you see a steep decline. It used to be much higher in the previous generation, especially in the post-war, and now it's reaching basically its rock bottom, and that's a very alarming phenomenon that has been discussed at great length. And at the same time, we are giving more and more of our information to these San Francisco-based or the innovation world in general. We allow them to know much more than we would allow our governments to know. When Edward Snowden discovered that the CIA was collecting fairly minimal information about citizens. I can't remember exactly what it was. I think it was basically the log of their phone calls.
Yes.
That was an international outcry. How dare the American government do that? But at the same time, Google knows that I'm here right now. It probably knows that we're in the same room. At some point, they will do some data analysis and they will know what we're talking about. So, okay, here we're going live. We're giving the permission for people to follow.
Definitely.
But even when I don't want to go public, these companies know much more than I would ever allow my government to know about me. And what I find interesting is that more and more people, whether they realize it or not, are making that choice. they're allowing the companies to collect more information about them because they see the added value, because they see that big data basically allows the service providers to provide them with better quality of service. So today Netflix can provide me with films that I'm very likely to enjoy because they know my taste. And SoundCloud is providing me with music that I usually appreciate. And we can go on and on. Huh? I mean, ads that I get, well, here sometimes I'm quite curious because I get on YouTube ads in a language I don't speak, and that's where I say, Google,
Right.
who owns YouTube, is supposed to know much more about me than just the language I speak. So, I mean, it squeaks sometimes, but in general, we agree to it because we see the added value. One might argue that when it comes to trust in governments, people's perception is that they're not getting enough out of their governments. I don't know. I mean, here I'm really stretching this this argument, but basically we're voting with our legs. You know,
Definitely.
We give that power.
In terms of using algorithms and big data to basically satisfy our desire for content and information, this is making people in general quite comfortable. I don't have to go and look for something I might be interested in.
Mm-hmm.
We are served with that. This is how most social networks work, and also other similar services. Now, this brings advantages and challenges, and also a bit of dangers.
Mm-hmm.
Now, can you give us an example of these three different situations? So when it is an advantage that a company is able to provide content we know we're going to like. The challenges for the future, probably these companies will need to cooperate more with governments, also in terms of information literacy, or the facts that people need to be aware of what they're doing online.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of dangers, I would argue personally that the fact that we create echo chambers and that we don't have anymore an incentive in going beyond our own perceptions and just being happy with what is served to us, it might limit our cognitive ability at a certain point, but also it might limit our ability to consider others' opinions.
Mm-hmm. Well, you speak a lot about content and about information, and that indeed is very present in our discussion about populism and about fake news. My argument went much beyond content. It's basically about decisions that we make. So with big data, I can actually rely not on my own intuition, but on these service providers who are working better and better. So some of the existing examples are maybe about topics which are not that important. With TripAdvisor, I can choose a restaurant that typically I would like because, it's generated by big data and my friends and my recommendations. Same for hotels, same for, for the time being, services which are not that critical. One of my favorite writers, Yuval Noah Harari, it's a compatriot of mine, but that's not the reason I like him so much. He argues that this is going so far, and that was the argument about trusting it more than our own cognitive ability, is the fact that up until now, basically the whole humanist movement was saying it's not about God that has the best source of information and insight, it's all in our heads. So as a voter, I have my inner voice to put in the ballot the party that I believe in. And as a consumer, the consumer is right. And on the stock exchange, the investors know what's right. So it's based on the assumption that we have something innate in us, and we can reason and we can make a decision, and when you aggregate all this knowledge, basically you have some kind of a mass intelligence. And he's saying, now we're at a point where this might change because we realize that my inner voice is less efficient than the big data algorithms. They know better than I do what is good for me. And he predicts to the future some very interesting hypotheses that, for example, who do you marry? And in a world where Google knows me so well, in a world where even my health is being monitored, so my heartbeat, my adrenaline, the hormones that I secrete, if I start monitoring that, if some kind of a provider basically can follow me on a date and see how I react to the person, and of course the other person, and they aggregate information from society in general, and they start drawing some statistical results, they can basically tell me, if you marry that person, you might be happy for the next year, because that person is very good looking and funny. In 10 years, you will appreciate other qualities. So if you marry the other person, which is not your intuitive choice, you are likely to be happier in 10 years. And the scariest thing about this is that it's likely to work quite well. So Harari argues that we're going to put aside all the societal mechanisms that are based on our inner voice.
Yes.
And we're going to delegate much more to technology and big data. And that is a very interesting development, but you're asking what is good and what is bad. It's also very scary. Not because I don't think it's efficient. It will be efficient. The problem is the gatekeepers. It's the fact that someone has the keys to these services, and they're not always accountable. They're not always scrutinized, and for the time being, there isn't much control over them. One of the reasons is the fact that decision making or legislation is bound by geographic boundaries. These companies, by definition, are global. They don't start and end when the border is drawn. So basically, they have power, which is very difficult. There are fiscal issues of where they're based, etc. But even when it comes to who is the authority that is going to decide what kind of data someone can collect about me, all these questions are now being challenged because it's the first time in history where we have these virtual companies that aren't based anywhere and they exist somewhere, but they still have a huge impact on our lives. And that is a fascinating question.
About the dating metaphor, the dating circumstance you mentioned, I invite people watching this. It's very few, but it's going to be also.
Wait, we can see how many?
I think just only one person.
For now.
We'll see when it's going to be shared in different groups.
Yeah.
Is that in my previous interview to Giuseppe Porcaro, who is writing a book about a future scenario where dating apps will actually determine who we vote for, I saw a lot of parallels with the examples you mentioned, and I invite you to go and check in the page, the previous interview. There is going to be an event in Brussels, 20th of April, so on Thursday. Even Politico editor Ryan Heath will be there to discuss the topic. So you will see all the links to
what is
the
event about? I didn't know about this ad that we're doing now. So
exactly. The event is called Tinder Politics, actually. Disco Sour Tinder Politics. It's a presentation of this book, which is coming out, which really presents a future society where exactly everything you said comes into reality. Everything we do, and especially all political decisions, are not decided by votes, but by our interactions. So there is in this society there is an algorithm that everything we do, every like we put, every right swipe or left swipe in dating apps like Tinder, we do matters in the decision of government.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it's a very fascinating scenario game.
Which already assumes that the government will remain relevant in 50 years. Which is, yeah.
That's the case.
Which is interesting by itself.
That's the case. And so I invite you to come to the event to check out the discussion group that has been set up to continue the debate on the topic. All the articles have been mentioned in this Facebook Live. You will see a link to it in the post, and also links to Dan's work.
We lost the light.
This is Brussels.
This is energy efficiency.
This,
if we don't move enough.
This could happen every now and then. And basically, we're gonna cut it.
There we go. We're
gonna cut it to this. Dan, it was a fantastic conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm looking forward to seeing more of your writing in the future. And you can follow Dan on Twitter and on LinkedIn, I would say. Do you have any other social media presences you'd like to mention?
Not that are public.
Not that are public, all right. So we'll stick to this. Thank you so much for watching. All this will be posted also on YouTube. And see you next Wednesday for the next interview. See you soon.